First off, thank you all for coming this afternoon. You know, we were worried we weren't going to have enough people to fill the room upstairs, so it's really great that you can take the time and join us on this. I am Eric Yonke. I'm the interim dean for the College of Letters and Science, and I had asked Professor John Blakeman to hold this talk because he does teach and research and publish on the First Amendment and other constitutional subjects, and also because we had a civil discourse initiative going on in the college for the last year or so, of which, again, John was part of that as well. And really, what prompted me to ask to have him do this talk now is after seeing what happened at the University of Virginia this summer, I thought it was an appropriate thing for us to start our new academic year by talking about free speech, talking about the First Amendment, looking forward to our year, and really looking at what is the place and what is the role of a public university such as UWSP, you know, within really what's kind of a heated time period for us when there's a lot of questions about what is appropriate, what's allowed, what's the role of the university. And so I really am just very thankful that John's willing to share with us, and I'll let him take it from here. And hopefully we can continue to have a very good kind of a dialogue about these issues.
Okay, preliminaries and the Exodus from 227, someone left a sweater. So there was also a pencil case and a Gideon Bible. I left those up there, so they're yours. Don't blame them. Now, I had prepared pretty lengthy remarks about hate speech and the First Amendment, and I've decided to change things around a little bit. If you want to know what's in the content of my speech or lecture, it's here. I've got 50 copies. When 50 of you take one copy each, and I'll ask faculty not to take a copy, you can email me and I'll send you one. If you don't get a copy and you want one, come by and see me. I'll print you off a copy, or email me and I'll send it to you. But just be clear about the content of my speech. If you have any questions about it, it's here. So I encourage you to read it. That's how you'll learn what I'm talking about. Okay? But having said that, my task today is I want to talk about the First Amendment for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a conversation. And the conversation will be about the First Amendment, hate speech, and what we can and cannot do about it. Now, some ground rules for that conversation. I wrote them out so I wouldn't forget it. First, be civil, okay? So we're going to talk about hate speech, but hate speech is not allowed, ironically. You don't get to use words that none of us like, and some of us want to ban. So we're going to talk about hate speech, but you don't get to use hate speech. You don't get to use those words. You have to be civil to each other. You do have to speak up if you're asking me a question so I can hear you, okay? You do have to listen to what other people say. You can't be disruptive, even if you fundamentally disagree with what someone's saying. So, no outbursts, okay? Sit and listen and take it in and participate, and we're all going to learn from each other. We're going to engage in a destructive dialogue. And direct your questions at me, not at the other person. All right? Come through me. I'll answer your questions as best I can. So, to get underway, what's hate speech? You know, believe it or not, in our First Amendment tradition, there's no one set definition of it. There's no one definition of hate speech that judges gravitate to. It's something that our constitutional system's been grappling with for 100 years, if not a little longer. We start to see the first hate speech questions pop up right around World War I, and then certainly in the 1920s with the KKK, and the rise of the ACLU as a fundamental civil libertarian organization. By the 1930s, we're talking about hate speech in the context of fascism and Nazism. By the 1950s and 60s, we're talking about hate speech in the context of the civil rights movement. And now here we are today, we haven't come full circle, but we're talking about hate speech in the modern context of very polarized politics. So hate speech has been something that we've dealt with for a century, and we haven't found a solution to regulate it or to drive it out of the marketplace of ideas. So there's no one set definition in 100 years of trying. But some of the things that we know about hate speech lead us to a kind of working definition, which is hate speech consists of words that are intended to harm and to wound, to inflict injury on another person because of the group they belong to. So hate speech is harmful. There's no question about that. Hate speech does not contribute to a search for the truth. It does not contribute to political debate. It doesn't contribute to social debate, for that matter. So we're probably in agreement that hate speech is bad, that there's nothing to be gained by it. But we do have a fundamental issue, which is the First Amendment free speech clause, which, as the way it has evolved over the course of almost 100 years, and especially in the past 50 years or so, it has evolved so that we've ended up in 2017 with what we call the free marketplace of ideas. Now, as far as the First Amendment goes, two, I think, pretty key points that you have to keep in mind. And this, might help you grapple with the problems associated with hate speech. One point is the First Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was written to place our individual rights and liberties away from the control of the majority. That's why our rights and liberties are paramount. They can't be defined, redefined, tinkered with by the majority. It is the minority that benefits from that understanding of the Bill of Rights. And by minority, I might mean racial minority, gender minority, religious minority. Minority can mean anything. People who aren't in the majority. So first off, our Bill of Rights places rights and liberties out of the reach of the majority. And we do that for a very good reason, several good reasons. One, majorities tend towards tyranny from time to time. Majorities like to take rights and liberties away from people. That's one argument. Another argument is majorities change. So what today's majority says about free speech and what is acceptable, tomorrow's majority will say something completely different. And to put that in reality for you, if you go back to 1950s Alabama and every other southern state were putting in place laws, they represented the will of the majority, that made it very difficult for civil rights groups like the NAACP or the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to organize. The NAACP was told by the state of Alabama in the mid-50s, if you want to operate in our state, you must give us your registration list. You have to tell us who your membership are. And the NAACP is like, no, we don't want to do that. For an obvious reason. Once you figure out who our members are, you're going to retaliate. And so the NAACP sued and won. And the Supreme Court said they have a First Amendment free speech right to withhold their membership rolls. So that's a real example of a majority using the law to try to limit the free speech rights of the minority. That's why the Bill of Rights places our rights and liberties off limits. So that's the first big point. The second big point is this. Over the course of 50 years, whether you like it or not, over the course of 50 years, the Supreme Court, interest groups, politicians have gravitated to an understanding of the First Amendment free speech clause that we call the free marketplace of ideas. And what that means is, this goes all the way back to Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1919, where he first used that metaphor, that the First Amendment is a marketplace. You put your ideas into it, other people throw their ideas into it, and then those ideas that are true bubble up. Those ideas that are false are driven out of the marketplace. The people engaged in the free marketplace of ideas decide what they believe. So as we go from 1919 all the way up to the 1960s and the Vietnam War era, through the 1970s and 1980s, the Supreme Court starts to articulate what this free marketplace of ideas looks like. And what we end up with is an understanding of the First Amendment that values what we call pure speech, the words that you use. And that free marketplace of ideas is pretty much open to all people. Okay, whether you use that marketplace or not, it is open to you. And in that marketplace, ideas are valued by the people who engage in the marketplace. So the way this system is supposed to work is, you're in the marketplace of ideas, you hear something you don't like, you throw your own ideas into the marketplace to rebut it. And over the course of time, we end up with this understanding of free speech that pretty much whatever you say goes. Now, that leads us to a big principle in First Amendment law, which is the government cannot regulate the content of what you say. It can regulate how you say it, when you say it, the means that you use. It cannot regulate what you say, the content of your speech. And there are only very few exceptions where, according to the Supreme Court, certain types of expression aren't recognized by the First Amendment anyway. The one we need to worry about is something called the fighting words doctrine. This is where it all gets confusing. But according to the Supreme Court back in the 1930s, fighting words are not part of the First Amendment. They don't belong in the free marketplace of ideas. Words that provoke other people to violence. Words that have a tendency to provoke other people to violence are not considered part of the marketplace of ideas. But the problem is, the Supreme Court has been very, very narrow in how it views fighting words. Violence has to result from someone's words, basically. So you can scream and shout at another person and call them all the names that you want, and if violence doesn't follow, then it's going to be very, very hard to punish you for the words that you use. That's the reality. And that does seem sort of ridiculous, but that's simply it. Now, to put a new gloss on that, about 10 years ago, the Supreme Court articulated a variation of that. One of the last hate speech cases the court dealt with, and it's dealt with very, very few, coming out of the state of Virginia. Virginia versus Black, 2003. Virginia has a law that makes it a crime to burn a cross with the goal of intimidating other people. That law has been around since the 1950s, and this is somewhat ironic because Virginia was the most segregationist state throughout the Civil Rights era, yet it has this law that is designed to only punish one type of conduct, and that's burning a cross by the KKK. The Supreme Court upheld the law over 10 years ago and said, well, as part of this fighting words category, words that are true threats to other people, words that are so virulent, so harmful in their context, those words can be banned too. But the court didn't then go on and bother to tell us exactly what it meant. So as things currently stand with the First Amendment, content is wide open. We're in the marketplace of ideas. The government cannot censor what you say content-wise. It can limit you how you say it, when you say it, where you say it, but it can't limit the content. And that's made it very, very hard for municipalities, public universities, states, even the federal government to come up with a solution to regulating and banning hate speech. Speech that doesn't contribute to any political or social debate and is only designed to harm people. Now, that's the reality. Whether you like it or not is completely up to you. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. So you have the foundation. Let's see what's on your mind.
Hey. My name is Sophie. I'm a super senior biochemistry major, so I've been here for a while. I'm part of a bunch of different activist circles, some familiar faces, some not. I would like to point out something you said that I think needs some correction. When you were talking about hate speech and how kind of we're all on the same page with it and everything.
I didn't say that.
Well, okay, let me rephrase what you said, and if you want to make a correction, then I think you should. So I said, you said we're all on the same page and we don't like hate speech.
Okay, well, I did say that.
You did say, you're right, okay. To me, personally, and I hope you don't take offense to that, that statement is, especially as a university, dangerously naive. So,
Well, explain to me why it's naive.
I'm about to. if
Okay.
you let me. Okay. The fact of the matter is, we have people who are literally, in today's day and age, calling themselves Nazis and holding rallies nationwide. They are organizing, and when we discuss free speech and hate speech, it doesn't get to be discussed in a vacuum where minority groups are temporarily not hurt by what we talk about and are not targeted. So what I want to know is that as an individual and as a faculty member and as the member of this university that has been chosen to address hate speech this semester, in light of everything that's happened, do you both acknowledge that overall we are not on the same page about hate speech, and there are people that are not only, like the whole reason this is a problem is because there are people who do like hate speech and are using it. If we're on the same page with it, and the fact of the matter is, like, we don't get to just make a statement and say, oh, well, like, everyone in this room is nice people.
I'll acknowledge that, but I did mean everyone in this room is probably on the same page. Nationwide, we're not. So, but I may be making serious assumptions about your typical UWSP student, who I tend to think is right-minded on most things.
Well, I mean, I don't, like...
Now, I mean, if you are raising questions about hate speech on this campus, I don't know. I'm not privy to those incidents or those conversations.
I guess, what do you think makes a UWSP student different than, say, someone at one of the universities in Virginia?
Well, okay, at the University of Virginia, which I'm a graduate of, they have an active KA chapter, Kappa Alpha, which is a Southern fraternity whose sole reason to exist is to keep alive the Confederate tradition. And so I would say on UVA's campus, there's probably a fairly small group of students who are not interested in worrying about white supremacy at all. But yet I have more faith in the students on this campus. Maybe it's misplaced, but I tend to think that students on this campus are a little more right-minded and hopefully less tolerant of hateful speech.
Because of the geography.
Yeah, because of the geography, sure.
So because of the geography, white supremacy isn't as much of a concern.
I didn't say that. White supremacy is very much a concern in central Wisconsin. You only have to drive 30 minutes outside of Stevens Point, and you get awfully close to white supremacist groups.
Right, and that's exactly my point, though.
Right.
We're in very close proximity to a lot of this stuff, so
Sure.
I don't necessarily know.
But we have a nice community here where we can actually debate these things. And to my knowledge, since I've been here, no white supremacy group has sought a permit to hold a rally on campus. I might be wrong.
Well, I mean, can you say something?
Well, let me take another question. Let's move on. Yeah.
Michael O'Mara, I live in the community. Today my wife was walking on the Green Circle Trail between the Art Center and Piffner. Someone put a big white swastika and 4 KKKs down.
Yeah, I saw photos of that.
Does that constitute speech?
Yeah. But don't get me wrong, that's also, you
Yes.
know, defacing public
Yes,
property.
and so let's say we're talking to Louis Maletsky, the DA. You know, he can get him for defacing property and,
Sure.
you know, those misdemeanors. But would it be possible in Wisconsin for him to prosecute for a hate crime or refer it over to the federal district court?
To my understanding, no. Wisconsin has what's called a hate crimes enhancer. That if you commit a bias-motivated crime against a person, you assault someone, and you do so because of their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, you can have your sentence, several years tacked onto your sentence. You're not prosecuting them for the speech that they use. You're prosecuting them for their motivation. And so that's a completely different thing. As far as painting a swastika on the pavement, I honestly don't know if that would fall under the hate crimes enhancer or not. That would be up to a prosecutor to try to figure out.
Do you think there's a difference between a couple of like stupid middle schoolers or high schoolers saying and doing like things that would qualify as hate speech, thinking it's not harming anyone, and someone who's actually doing it with the intent to harm?
Yes, there is a difference in using words intentionally to harm someone and engaging in conduct, wearing a Confederate flag sweatshirt with no clue about what it means and no regards to how other people feel with it. You know, the law always punishes you more severely for doing things intentionally. Had that said, you can intentionally engage in racist speech under the First Amendment, and as long as you haven't provoked someone or caused violence yourself, your words will be protected.
So what role do you think ignorance plays?
I honestly don't know. I think we're having this debate because there's a lot of ignorance among the entire population about what kind of speech we should tolerate. But I don't know. That's one of those questions that I'm not so comfortable in answering. You know, that's more opinionated, I guess.
Piggybacking off of that question, how would the courts even gauge intent in a case like that? What's the legal precedent for that? Is there one?
Well, I don't really want to get caught up in legal questions. I'll go back to that Virginia case. As the statute was worded, it is a crime to burn a cross with the intent to harm or convey a threatening message. The act of burning a cross is on its face evidence of intent, which creates this real loophole. Not a loophole, I take that back. It makes it incredibly difficult for a defendant who's caught burning a cross to defend himself. Because the act of burning a cross is evidence that you intended to harm people. And you can see why the state of Virginia would word it that way, because it's an easy way to prosecute and convict. There is a recent case concerning a federal law and hate speech on Facebook and social media, Alonis versus U.S. It was just decided in 2017. And here you have a guy who's using very hateful speech on Facebook towards his former wife. And he's prosecuted by the federal government. And the federal government could not prove he intentionally used that hate speech to harm his wife. They could not get enough evidence to show his mindset at the time he was using Facebook. So it's incredibly difficult. And I don't know, but like I said, I'm not the expert in the prosecution side of it and the legal side of it.
You just mentioned the Facebook case that's working against you. Are there any other cases currently working through the district and appellate courts that could wind up on the Supreme Court's docket?
Yeah, there is a case coming out of Mississippi where Mississippi was sued to get rid of the Confederate flag on its larger state flag. And the lower federal judge said, yeah, that Confederate flag represents hate. Under Virginia versus Black, it does represent one of those virulent threats almost. But then the judge went on to say, but it's a state flag. And I'm not going to be the federal judge to tell a state to change its flag. That'll probably wind its way up to the Supreme Court. We might treat it as a kind of hate speech issue. And my hunch is the Supreme Court would say it's Mississippi's flag, they can do what they want.
You mentioned the Confederate flag. People have different opinions on it, whether some people believe it's a sign of hate, others say it's heritage. For something that has a split definition in public opinion, how exactly would that apply in regards to like a hateful message? Like if to some it's not a hateful symbol, but to others it is, how exactly would that, I guess, work out?
It depends on which state you're in and whose majority you're talking about. So in Virginia, south of the Mason-Dixon line, the majority will say that represents heritage. In states like Wisconsin, north of the Mason-Dixon line, the majority will say that flag doesn't represent anything but the losing side of the Civil War. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it gets to the deeper issue of how do you go about banning a symbol that a lot of people find very, very offensive. And I'm not sure that you actually can. You know, you'll never arrive at a national standard to ban the Confederate flag. You might see states try to do it, but my hunch is that would be declared unconstitutional. And there are actually Supreme Court cases on flags anyway. You know, you can go all the way back to the 1930s and find a case about the right to walk around wherever you want with a red communist flag. So it's not something that would be easy to drive out of the marketplace.
Are you familiar with the ongoing debate here in Wisconsin concerning campus free speech?
Yeah, sort of. You mean the bill pending?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to spread up any partisan message here, just wondering, do you think that hate speech or auxiliary combatant factors into that bill in any way?
Oh, absolutely. That's a larger national conservative movement that's pushing that legislation. And I mean, you know, that's how the lawmaking process works. But it's a larger national movement and it really comes in the wake of what happened at Middlebury College when the sociologist Charles Murray, thank you, yes. Don't get old. Charles Murray is giving a speech and he shouted down. And that's sort of a model bill as I understand it. And what it really affects public universities and forces public universities to take steps to keep people from protesting speeches. You know, and if it's passed, I imagine it would fall most heavily on public safety because they're the ones who have to implement it at the ground level.
So going off of what his question was, like at UC Berkeley, they have all the rights and everything like that. They're trying to do another free speech week with Minneapolis and some other people there. What's your opinion? Should they allow it to have it? And if, say, someone like that would come to Stephen's point, would you support it or go against it?
Well, I wouldn't support the content of the speech, but I would support the speaker's right to speak. You know, and that's a distinction that we absolutely have to make. I wish you wouldn't ask me my opinion on things. I mean, I should have given you my disclaimer at the beginning, which is I don't speak for UWSP, okay? So just understand that. But I'm not really here to give you my opinion necessarily. But I think you've raised a point, which is public universities have to distinguish between the content and the conduct. And they, just like any government agency, they can't limit the content of speech. So if Charles Murray asks for a permit to come here and stand on the corner and talk, not that he would, you basically have to let him. You know, worst case scenario is an alt-right group asks for a permit to hold a rally on campus. I don't know if UWSP has a process in place to shut them out. Virginia, UVA definitely did not. I mean, that's a different story. But that's the dilemma that public agencies face. Either one.
You were saying that the First Amendment doesn't allow the content of what's being said to be changed by the university, but you also said that they can change how it's said?
The manner in which it's given.
Okay, so the medium in which it's told.
Yeah, the medium in which it's told, the location, the medium that's used, like a bullhorn versus another amplifier or no amplifiers. So the government has a lot of control over speech in that context.
Okay.
It just can't regulate the content of it.
With that, sorry, with that being known, would that be an avenue that universities could change what's said on campus by how it's being said?
I would think so. That would be my opinion.
Okay.
And I don't know UWSP's policy. If you want to know the nightmare scenario, go back to the Friday night before the alt-right march in Charlottesville. Okay? The alt-right groups did not get a permit from UVA to protest. They didn't need to. Virginia had no policy in place. The lawn was considered an open area. And so there was nothing Virginia public safety could really do until after the fact. And so that ought to be a lesson to a public university, any public university, that if you want to forestall or at least control the free marketplace of ideas, you need fairly strict policies in place to tell people where they can protest, how they protest, the manner of it. You just can't regulate the content.
She's acting up for 3 questions.
Done, okay.
Okay, sorry, I've had this question for a while now. Going back to there being a difference between kids having or saying, using words that would typically offend others or hurt others, and then people that are actually doing things to intimidate it. What happens? I'm a freshman, so this is still freshly in my mind from high school. We did have a lot of students who did display Confederate flags, and even after, even portions of the student body said that's not right. And speaking to these specific students about what it did mean, they chose to use slurs and other symbols of hatred.
That's an issue for the school to deal with.
But what if the school doesn't, the school says that it's not really their issue?
I think that's very unfortunate. But I don't see that you have any recourse except maybe through their parents. You know, that's sad, really. I mean, but honestly, that's up for the school to sort out. And it sounds like they might be just unwilling to do that.
The bill going through that was mentioned earlier about restricting protests against speeches.
Right.
At what point are we crossing the line where by protecting someone else's free speech, you're restricting others by doing that? Okay,
one way to think about it, though, is that free marketplace. The others can always hold their own rally. They can always bring in their own speaker. In fact, if you look at the Southern Poverty Law Center's guidelines on how to deal with this, they say, number one, ignore it if you don't like the speech or the speaker. Number two, organize your own rally. Invite your own speaker to rebut the speech that you don't like. So there's always that option, and I think people forget about that. Just because you disagree with Charles Murray doesn't mean, this is my opinion, that you have to sit there and try and rebut him while he's giving a talk. You may be absolutely wrong, but you don't have to rebut him then and there. Yeah, in the back.
So I don't know if this is the right point to ask this question, but many people brought up the Confederate flag and how it may not be a sign of hatred in some forms, but a sign of something else. I would like to ask the audience, if I can, what else could it mean? Like, can somebody enlighten me on how they look at it as something different than hatred? Because I'd like to see somebody else's perspective.
That's directed at you all.
I want to be open-minded about it. It's not always about hate. I'd like to know how other people look at it.
Okay, I think that's a fair question. So let's go with the gentleman in the red.
Now, somebody is not going to just go with the flag because it's hatred. They're gonna be doing it because it's for something else. They're not going to be openly.
But what else is it? What is the what else?
So it's going to be like heritage, like this man said earlier. It's, they believe in their lineage and what they were doing.
I have a question about that.
Okay, wait, remember the ground rules for listening civilly. All right? So, are you done? Yeah, sure. Okay, some of your points
they're not gonna openly just like say that they hate people with the Confederate flag. That's not like their goal. It'd be a stupid goal if it was their goal. So like, it's going to be supporting their heritage, like whatever they believe their ancestors are fighting for.
Okay. So that's one. Somebody back in the back. Yeah, you had your.
Another meaning behind the Confederate flag is also the right to secede from the Union, which was, among other things, a point of which the Civil War was fought, and then it can be taken that way. It can also be taken away by hate, which I don't think is the right way to take it. But I also don't think you should be limiting it and trying to get rid of it, because then you're erasing history, and if you erase history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Okay, so another argument.
I just wanted to say about the heritage thing. And if you're from the South, that's one thing, and I don't know, but I think we're in the Midwest, and when I see a bunch of kids like that back in my school who their entire life is spent in the Midwest and they have a Confederate flag, I think that's a completely different thing that can't be really related to heritage or being proud of like where you come from, everything. I feel like geographical things has to take some role in that, because in the Midwest, the Confederate flag, what role does that really have to do?
Okay, 3 people there, right together. I'll let you all sort out who goes.
I just had a quick question for her. If it's not heritage for them, what do you think it would be then?
I think it's hate for them.
They're just intentionally disseminating hate.
I don't know what their intent is, but I know that they aren't doing it with like good intentions.
Okay, but there are 2 others right here in the middle.
Regardless of whether or not its intention is for hate or whether its intention is to show off your heritage, the Confederate flag is technically a flag of treason. It is a treasonous flag against the United States of America. The Confederate States technically committed treason. So, regardless of its meaning, it is a symbol of treason.
I think context is really important, because like the same with the swastika, you might be inclined to say, well, it's always a symbol of hate. But then if you go to India and you see a swastika, you know, the ones with like the 4 dots around it, it's not, the Nazis weren't the only people who used that symbol. So you couldn't just ban the symbol outright, because it has too many different meanings that you just...
Sure, it depends on which majority views it at a certain point in time. Absolutely. A gentleman in the back.
In response to the treason part, Confederate soldiers are still considered U.S. veterans by the U.S. government, just so that's it. So, and if you were against Robert E. Lee, which many people are certainly going to be doing slaves, so did Ulysses S. Grant. But we turned out his sections as well, perhaps we should. But to think, know the history, we can't think of those papers and things like that.
Well, I think what we're illustrating to each other is we're trying to derive meaning from one symbol, and we're not arriving at a set meaning. That gets to the dilemma about how we interpret those symbols, which gets us to the difficulty of banning symbols because some or many or most are offended by it.
I'm gonna kind of pivot back to the just kind of free speech thing. I'm wondering about how, like on a campus, for example, you could divorce hate speech from the effects it has. For example, and I know you regret saying your opinion, but you said you would support Nilo's right to speak on campus. At a previous engagement, he posted a photo of a trans student and mocked her and misgendered her and stuff. allowing that to happen is going to send a message that it is okay to victimize these students, and any group that would be a victim of that, any member of the group, any ally, anybody who's on the fence, anybody who doesn't like trans people, they're all going to hear that and take away that as a message that the school is saying. And similar to the just ignore it thing, if you have a speaker saying, well, I think Jews should be exterminated, and then another speaker saying, no, that's wrong, they're kind of on an even footing, and the implication there is that Jews should be exterminated is an idea, is like a legitimate position to have, but perhaps I'm naive, but that is not a good position to have, and that's something that...
Yeah, right, but this is where we have set ourselves up with the free marketplace of ideas and the First Amendment, that, you know, the legitimacy of an idea in the marketplace doesn't matter. So while in my mind it is illegitimate and immoral for someone to come into the marketplace and say, we need to exterminate Jews, the marketplace simply allows ideas into it. And it doesn't question their legitimacy. Public institutions are not supposed to question the legitimacy content-wise.
But the problem is the very airing of those ideas gives them legitimacy, and...
Absolutely, but that's the problem we have. And I don't have a solution for you. But the reality is, speech you don't like is going to end up in public. Speech I don't like is going to end up in
It's not
public.
just about don't liking, it's about actively calling
Sure,
harm.
yeah, hate speech harms. Speech that harms you is going to end up in public. And in the eyes of the First Amendment, how you deal with that is you rebut it with your own ideas.
So why is it, so with this coming bill, they're saying that it wouldn't be okay to rebut it at the...
Absolutely.
And like
It
what
is,
you said...
that is the gist of the bill, that it is not okay to rebut the person advocating for genocide at that time.
So do you think that's in accordance with the laws?
No, well, yes and no. I mean, if you think about the Boston, you know, a good example of where the marketplace works. You have the alt-right getting a permit on Boston Common to hold a rally. You have 40,000 counter-protesters showing up and effectively shutting down the rally. That's how the marketplace is supposed to work. What that proposed legislation does is it forces public universities to take extra steps to let the speaker keep speaking, to keep counter-protests from countering the speech.
In Wisconsin, we have an interesting lawsuit about school districts. We had a child who was gay, who was unmercifully teased for years. He eventually quit school his junior year, tried to commit suicide, and then sued in federal court. And the federal court said this is a tort, went back down, and they found that the superintendent of schools and the principal were guilty of not protecting this child because they knew he was being harmed.
Right.
And it was a large judgment against the school district. I think it was the Superior Ashland.
Well, you know, the equivalent, to show you how far we extend the free marketplace of ideas, the case Snyder versus Phelps, Westboro Baptist Church.
Yes.
A lot of you have probably heard of them. They show up, they get the appropriate permits to protest in public, and they protest the funerals of soldiers and Marines killed in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they hold up these horrible signs. But yet the Supreme Court not long ago ruled that they are engaged in the marketplace of ideas.
I think the difference was in this case, it was evident that this child was having psychological harm.
Right, but
so it was, what was going on, it was the violence deal where you say if you have fighting words and result in harm, that's the deal. And I think that was the crux of that case.
Yeah, right, sure, okay.
I was gonna ask, what differentiates like fighting words from just like regular insults or something? Because I don't mean to be.
There's no clear-cut answer for that.
Yeah.
Judges often figure it out based on what happens next.
Okay.
So, if I say you're stupid and you come down here and hit me,
Yeah.
you know, you'd be prosecuted for assault. I could easily be prosecuted for breaching the peace. But it's often what is going to happen next.
When you say it's based off of what's going to happen next, do they treat it like a science experiment where they at least prevent those words from being said again at a later date based on past experience?
Not necessarily. I mean, if we in this room tried to define what fighting words are, I don't think we'd arrive at any agreement. You know, we might come up with a handful that we think are known to prompt violence, but then we'd go all over the map. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I believe censorship is not the answer because you can actually.
Oh, you? Sorry. Yeah, speak up. Speak up then.
I said it's actually not a good idea to promote censorship because that actually could lead to violence. If you feel like your opinions are not being expressed openly in a forum that generally everybody has a will here, they can say, I do not like this, and I can basically blow it off. It's when you marginalize people who have these bad ideas, they eventually will group together, become stronger, and eventually will lash out at people in a violent way. And
Sure.
certainly you can look at history and that does happen.
We saw that in Charlottesville.
So, in my personal opinion, you know, probably a few of these people are going to disagree with. And I would like to answer that lady's question about the Confederate flag. I have family fought on both sides. I lost 6 family members in the southern part of the family. We have old sabers dipped in blood with their own stuff and a tore up Confederate flag on some battlefield. Truth of the matter, it was not done by hate. Personally, I think a lot of people just borrow a symbol and promote hate. At the end of the day, yes, it's a symbol of treason. That is true. But a lot of flags in the world began as treason. But in the end, they won. Now it's not.
Wrap it up, Ben.
I know that, but I was going to wrap up right after that.
All right, thank you.
So about the flag and like the swastika, I think it's important to note that the swastika is an ancient symbol that's belonged to many cultures. And the Confederate flag was created for the specific purpose. It was stated by its creator that it supported the idea that white people were above black.
Yeah, that's context matters. Absolutely. Guy in the hat has been waiting to get in.
All right, so I remember watching this documentary about protests during the Vietnam War, and one of the contexts in there was some of the protesters in the war were waving flags of the NBA. Now, of course, at the time, they were our enemy. Now, would waving flag of an enemy that your country is in conflict with, would that be considered under that expression as fighting words? Because you're...
Probably not, because there's a long line of Supreme Court cases that protect the right to wave a flag. And it doesn't matter what the flag is. So that's the kind of conduct that the court has historically protected, even though it inflames people. And it could lead to violence.
On a constitutional technical level, I have a question. If a government entity, institution, whatever, of any size, decides to ban any symbol, and they have 100% agreement, would that still be constitutionally invalid or breaking the Constitution?
But probably not. I don't know. I mean, okay, that's a good question. You mean if we are 100% assured that we want to ban this symbol?
Correct.
So we don't have to worry about a minority using that symbol and being oppressed. I don't know. That sounds like something you could study in grad school.
Isn't it who would object is the answer?
What's that?
If there's no objection, it's a moot point as to whether it's constitutional.
Well, yeah, okay, sure. I mean, if there's no objection, then society is going to find a way to regulate it anyway.
Yeah.
Until one person says, oh, wait a minute, I want to fly that flag after all.
Yeah.
And then you have to deal with the First Amendment all over again. We do censor a lot of speech just through unwritten rules and interactions with each other. You know, it doesn't violate the First Amendment necessarily. It's what we as a society sort of decide we want to limit.
Did I start again? So thank you.
We've gone full circle.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean that sincerely. I want to go back to the comments about Molly Yiannopoulos, whose name I mispronounced probably, and I don't really care.
I don't really know who he is, by the way. So.
Okay, then this will be cool. Part of the reason that he is such a big deal is that he's part of a known and self-proclaimed neo-Nazi organization and news organization called the Stormer.
Right.
So the reality of the situation is that when a campus, this campus or another campus invites him on, you can't really divorce him from that. That's, his presence at a campus isn't something that happens inside a vacuum where he's temporarily not part of a neo-Nazi organization.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify, as like a member of the faculty and as, an expert on these issues and everything, knowing that, do you still, again, there's a follow-up to this, do you still say that you would disagree with his message, but you would support his right to come here and, speak?
I'll qualify it. If UWSP has opened itself up as a public forum, if student groups are able to invite speakers onto this campus, then in my mind, they should be able to invite whomever they want within the guidelines that the university has set up.
So
I'm going to tell you that that's for the administrators to decide.
But I'm asking, if the administrators made a decision one way or the other way, like I said, this doesn't occur inside a vacuum where you're not going to have an opinion on this.
Sure.
So would you support, as a poli-sci professor, would you support a neo-Nazi organization coming to this campus and speaking, knowing
I'm not going to
have
answer
a
that.
huge impact on minorities groups?
I'm going to let these people answer that.
Okay.
I'm not going to answer.
Why would you answer my question?
Because I don't want to. A way of thinking about this that doesn't exist except for you and others. You're not understanding the fundamental point about the free marketplace of ideas, which is once it's open, anyone can wander into it and spout off their ideas no matter how vile and harmful.
You don't think we have a moral imperative to oppose ideas such as genocide?
Absolutely.
I don't think the problem is their opinion. I think the problem is when they act upon their opinion. If you want to voice, like a Christian could voice the fact that they don't believe in being gay, but the minute they start saying, you can't be gay, that's when it's a problem.
So you don't think thoughts and actions have any correlation? If someone's advocating for violence?
I'll answer that last question. We absolutely have a moral imperative to oppose genocide. That's why we signed the Genocide Convention. That's why we fight conflicts around the globe every now and then to halt the genocide. We don't always do it. We're not always the most moral country in the world. But yes, we have an imperative to halt genocide.
So what about people advocating for it here back at home?
It's not a crime to advocate for genocide. It is in Germany, it is in Canada, it is in Great Britain, it is in Australia, it is in New Zealand. All liberal democracies. It's not a crime here. Maybe it should be. I might support that. But until the Congress steps in and says we're making genocide a crime and we're going to hash out the First Amendment problems as we go, that free marketplace, I respect it. I'm sorry. I don't like telling you that. I don't like myself for respecting that. But it's the way the system works. And there's not much you can do about it except write your member of Congress, write letters to the Supreme Court, convince the ACLU to maybe litigate a little differently. There are ways of change here, but they take time, and the gears of constitutional law work really, really slowly. Oh, okay. You get this person gets the last one.
Here's the thing, we can't just ban hate speech because a few idiots are waving tiki torches. All right? We can't. Here's the thing, because if you make hate speech illegal, then whoever decides what hate speech is, then they have all the power in the conversation.